Welcome back to another episode of Inside Access Control, sponsored by SIA. Very excited today to have Michael Gips from Global Insights in Professional Security. Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So you and I were connected by a mutual friend. When I asked the friend, I said, hey, is there anybody that I could talk to about risk in general? And your name was given, and we've made a connection and talked a little bit about it beforehand. And really excited to dive into the subject because right now, especially when crises happen and people are making decisions and really in security as a whole, it's a lot of it comes down to the appetite for risk, the management of risk, the impacts of risk. It's risk, and how you handle it, what you do with it. So I thought now, especially since there seems to be a powder keg of decision making that's need to be had because people are starting to go back to work and to restaurants and the rest. So there's this desire to input some of our technology, and I think access control specifically, but security also is having a moment right now in a moment of crisis, but it's a positive, if you would, because of the mainstream side of what's going on, the added value of health benefits versus just security, all of that good stuff. So I want to dive into that with you. Why don't we kick it off though with, why don't you introduce yourself, your company, your background, and then we'll dig into that.
Sure, thanks. And all the points you brought up are right on. Those are the issues we're facing right now with risk. Again, my name is Michael Gips. I am principal at Global Insights in Professional Security. It's a firm that specializes in developing content, thought leadership strategy for corporate security departments and security companies and security vendors. Before that, for 25 years, I worked for ASIS International. For the last few years of that, I was Chief Global Knowledge and Learning Officer, responsible for everything from the magazine to standards and guidelines, certification, and education. And previous to that, I ran the CSO Roundtable, now called the CSO Center for Leadership and Development, which is an organization within ASS for senior executives in security. So the largest CSOs for the largest companies and institutions in the world, ranging from Johnson & Johnson to Accenture to Target. Before that, I was an editor of Security Management Magazine, where I wrote about 1,000 articles on all matters of security topics. And before that, I was a freelance journalist and an attorney. So I've come around. I started out as an attorney. I became a journalist, then security expert / association executive. So yeah, quite a
Interesting background. Yeah.
Quite a tour I've been taking.
Very much so. So why don't we jump into some of those topics that I did on the lead in here. So I mean, maybe if you just summarize your thoughts on what's going on right now, and then we could talk about the risk aspects of how people could look to manage that or attack it, if you would.
Sure. We're facing, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented. We've been through pandemics before. We certainly were through SARS and others in the past couple of decades, but nothing this significant since the Spanish flu. And we're just not used to everything turning on us at once. We can't leave our houses. The economy has fallen flat. So many of us have lost our jobs, and the unemployment rate is shooting up. And everybody's falling back into an extremely risk-averse mode. And risk isn't per se a bad thing. When you have dynamic risk, anytime you're going to succeed and you want to succeed in business, you've got to accept some risk. Without risk, there's no reward. So what's going to happen during this crisis is the people who learn the facts, see what's going on, where the trends are in business and society, are moving right now. They're developing technologies, they're developing contacts, they're thinking through this, and they are going to prosper greatly by making calculated bets during this time of high risk. Most everybody else is secluded in their house or sort of waiting for this thing to go through. And it's causing a lot of stress. In my neighborhood alone, there are all sorts of, we have a local blog where people are in a furious conversation about whether people should wear masks outside or not. Should you wear masks when you're jogging? Should you wear a mask when you're on a bicycle? Should you wear a mask when you're walking your dog? And people are either all in or all out. And on one side, you have people who say, "Look, I've read all the articles, and um, I'm in the medical field, and I know that the to get coronavirus to catch COVID, you either have to be subjected to a high viral load for in a quick period of time, or a lower viral load over a longer period of time. So if you're running by somebody who's not wearing a mask, there's a very low likelihood you're going to catch coronavirus. If someone sneezes in your face, there's a much higher risk that you're going to get it. So on one side of the spectrum, you have people who are looking at it that way, and the other side of people who say you should wear masks all the time, because if you could reduce the risk at all, even if you're 20 feet away from someone, you're wearing a mask and you happen to sneeze or cough or whatever, if you could just reduce the level of risk by 0.1% or whatever, it benefits society. So it's selfish not to wear a mask. And there's a heated argument going on around that. And it's actually dividing the community. Fortunately, you don't see fist fights in the street because no one's encountering each other in the street because there's a 6-foot distance rule. But
Right.
yeah, I'm being a little bit facetious there, but that's sort of the core of how people are addressing risk. They're completely risk averse, and there's a good reason to be, because it's a scary time. And there are people who are sort of looking at the facts and say, "Hey, I'm going to go about my daily life, but in a measured, rational way, by reducing the risk as much as possible. But I'm not going to put a mask on while I'm walking the dog when the closest person is 50 feet away in a pretty sparsely populated neighborhood." So
Right. Yeah. So if we apply that to some of the commercial applications that we have, and the overriding sort of broad statement on that end is that different people have appetite for different levels of risk and are susceptible to different levels of risk, right? So if I was to look at the commercial spots, let's take a look at the different stakeholders. And if I was to say, all right, I'm a local business, could be an office, restaurant, whatever it is, and I know I need to do something because of the risk side that's associated to it. There's also the security theater end of it and the rest of it, which is all important. But what is your suggestion on what do I do?
okay, well, that's a great question, because I was just talking about it yesterday with some companies that need to hire immediately. And grocery stores, shipping companies, trucking companies, other ones that are in high demand, and they can't get people fast enough. So what they're doing is hiring on the spot with no background checks. And some say we're not going to do background checks at all, and others say we'll do background checks when we can, but we need to throw bodies in there right now. And you see why they're doing it, because they want to, first of all, they want to make a profit. They want to produce and sell as much as possible, but they also want to meet public demand, and people need more toilet paper. They really need more toilet paper, and they're trying to accommodate that. And so we can see that as a public good. But personally, I would not hire anyone without a background check, or a background check that's appropriate to the level of what they're doing. Certainly if they're in a driving position, you've got to look at their driver records and criminal records and things like that. Maybe less so for other areas that aren't so sensitive. But I would encourage them to to hold off. I wouldn't take the legal risk, because you're going to see, I think, a mountain of lawsuits where people who are quickly hired turn out to be violent, or thieves, or otherwise do harmful and adversarial things. And to some extent, the government can say, all right, we're going to waive liability because of these extraordinary times, but not in a case where you have somebody who is a convicted felon who murders somebody in a store because they got insulted. That's the kind of thing that could take down a business. It could destroy their reputation. It could bankrupt them. So I mean, I would recommend as an attorney never to go on the background screen, but a lot of companies are deciding otherwise.
Gotcha.
And think about
Now,
this.
yeah, go ahead.
One other facet of that. Say I hire you to work in my grocery store, and you're the greatest employee. You know, everyone loves you. And a couple months later, your background screen comes back when they finally have cleared the backlog and the courts are open again. And oh my God, you have a felony on your record. You're a dangerous felon. Now, what do I do? Um, if I fire you, I've already hired you. You've proven yourself to be a good worker. Um, but if I keep you on, and do I do a follow up check? Do I keep, so you're kind of in a whipsaw or in a catch 22 where now I know you have a violent criminal background. What's my responsibility? Um, but you're also proven to be a good employee. So if I fire you, um, is that a violation? Because they're banned the box laws, in a lot of states where you can't refuse to hire felons just because they have a criminal background. And those are known as ban the box laws because on employment applications, there are boxes that say, do you have a criminal background? And now you can't, in about half the states, you can't put that box in there because it's discriminatory.
Interesting. So yeah, so the words of wisdom on that end are even through times of sort of the pressure cooker side of it, don't lose sight of the good process and due diligence to when it goes. And I would say whether that's on the hiring end, like you said, it's selecting different technologies that might be there, putting in solutions and creating new workflows and that. So taking the time to do that. So if I was to move to the next stakeholder, if you would, that's in that. If I'm a company that's creating product for these types of situations, what recommendations do you have on that end? Because I've seen so far a handful of companies, like there's almost been three. So you've got some companies that have pivoted in messaging and that are, I would say, are moving in the right direction because they're having a moment. You have some that are pivoting in a different direction and they're trying to take advantage of a situation, if you would, through message, and it may not be good. And then you have others that aren't doing anything. Between those three, and I guess the fourth is people are just continuing to do what they were doing before because they maybe they were on the right track. So if I'm one of those companies, whichever one, what is your recommendation? Because there's a pressure cooker as well. So what do you recommend they do?
You mean security companies or just, you know,
Yeah,
generally?
manufacturers, maybe an integrator side, really anybody that right now in our space, from a professional security standpoint, that has to respond to the pandemic from servicing the market, not like what they do with their own business, but like bringing something to market or the way they communicate. That's a risk associated to that as well, right? That they do it. So, any recommendations that you have for them on, maybe how to take a step back and do it properly?
Yeah, that's another good question, considering a great example of that and people stepping maybe outside their comfort zone is the temperature screening systems. You have a lot of people taking cameras, infrared cameras that weren't necessarily designed to do temperature screening, and then they're selling them. But as a matter of fact, there are only a few companies that were selling it for that purpose, still thermal cameras for temperature measuring purposes. And now a lot of other companies have gotten in the act and said, sort of retrofitting the purpose and saying, hey, yeah, we have that too. And you want to be careful with that because sure, you want to get in that market. And it's a huge market because I've talked to dozens of manufacturers and they've all either put in those systems in their warehouses, in their factories, and elsewhere in their headquarters, or they have sort of ad hoc programs where they'll have a nurse at the door or whatever with a handheld thermometer, but they're all looking at the technology right now. So uh, I would be very careful before I jumped into that field. There's potential liability issues. The cameras aren't necessarily designed for the purpose of detecting very minute differences in body temperature. Really, the differences, between if you're 101.4, you're okay. If you're 101.5, you're not okay. So you've got to have, the sensitivity in the camera uh, to make that decision. Right now, the criteria they use are kind of, they're nebulous. It's like no one's really quite sure. It's like, oh, I'm within 0.2 accuracy, 0.1 accuracy. It's like, how do we know that? Right now, they seem like just numbers that can't be verified. So before getting to that space, um, you really want to, um, I understand what people want to get on the money, and that's where the growth is in a shrinking economy. But kind of stay in your space, and if you want to do something like that, you know, I've seen success with people working with startups that specialize in that technology, and they work with them, and those are acquisitions they could make. But yeah, I would just tread carefully in those situations.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. I think advice to give a lot of these companies is, it kind of reminds me of the scene in The Matrix when he's going slow and the bullets are going fast by him, right? Like I feel like that we have to figure out our inner matrix on that case with the industry of figuring out how to. And I think this is where it comes back to one of the phase changes that I believe have happened in the industry, especially when you have times like this, is you really, really find out who has good leadership versus management.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, if anything, is having people that have some experience or expertise in and around how to manage risk and how to, this is where I think that even the health science side of bringing people in that understand the human side of how you break things down, and the emotional intelligence side of a lot of this is an impact. We're a very technical community of people, right? We want to solve this. It's like, who needs a hammer? I got a hammer.
Right.
And sometimes it might need to be, do we need a hammer versus, to do that. So, well, I appreciate you spending the time to do this. So I always like to end with two things. Is there anything that you're looking for right now, especially with your business or personally? Please let us know.
Well, I'm always interested in looking at startup opportunities. Um, People come to me with new technologies, and to help develop content for them and to make them a thought leader in their space. So I do business development, also content development,
Okay.
and I'm working with a couple of companies right now. Um, I also wanted to leave a just with one final
Yeah,
comment on
please.
risk. A lot of times people look at risk and they'll conflate a decision with a result. So you do something like you create a product, you create a temperature protection system, and you go through all the background. You say, okay, here's the market for it. Here's the technology. Here are the people who are going to sell it to. Here's the marketing plan, blah, 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 blah. We've done the test. It's going to do really well. And then it bombs. And then if you ask them, was that a good decision or a bad decision? They'll say it was a bad decision. Well, I would say it was a good risk to take. It was a good decision. It was a bad result. And people often conflate result with the decision itself. And there's an excellent book that I read a few months ago that talks about uh, this very phenomenon. It's called right back here, Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. It's a great book, so I commend that book to anyone who's interested in risk.
That's I love that it's funny. It goes back to also this sort of curiosity and experimentation side of, that I think people get the whole what is it, the failing fast, and but whatever. But yeah, the outcome may, although it may have been a bad one, doesn't mean it's negative. So I love that.
Exactly.
If people want to find out more information from you about you and what you do, where's the best place to do that?
You can go to my website. It's www.gipsinsights.com, GIPS insights.com, or they can email me at mike@gipsinsights.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on that a lot as well.
All right. Well, I really, really appreciate you doing this, Mike. Thank you. If you need anything, please let me know, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. It's been a blast.